Good evening to our attendees at this very important discussion that's going to deep dive into a very important subject, building supply chain resilience. And we warmly welcome all our attendees to this session. A few housekeeping rules before we begin. Simultaneous Sinhala and Tamil language interpretations will be available throughout this virtual event, and we encourage all attendees to utilize this facility if preferred. The interpretation option is available at the bottom portion of your screen. The session is interactive, and we encourage attendees to use the Q&A function to pose questions to the session panelists. This also is available at the bottom of your screen. Please tag UN Global Compact Network Sri Lanka and your participation in MGGLB Sri Lanka when sharing on social media. The Network Sri Lanka social media handles are available in the chat box. Globally, production is organized around a complex system of interdependent supply chains. Supply chain management aims to reduce cost of production, enhance speed of delivery, improve quality of products, and manage uncertainty in disruptions. This session will focus on the importance of integrating sustainability across an organization's value chain to ensure long-term value creation and propose business strategies to de-risk your supply chain and create resilience. The session panelists are as follows. Mr. Afam Ali serves as Director Supply Chain, Brandix Apparel. Afam is passionate about pursuing strategic collaboration supported by digitization as the means of successfully overcoming increasing challenges in supply chain management. Mr. Ikram Kutilan is the Managing Director of the Maritime and Freight sectors of Aitken Spence. He overlooks the shipping agency, port management, maritime education divisions, which come under the maritime sector as well as the freight sector of the group. Mr. Kutilan was also formerly the immediate past president of the Ceylon Association of Shipping Agents. Ms. Gaini Dialvis is the global chairperson of Women in Logistics and Transport. She is the immediate past president of the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport and the founding chairperson and advisor of Women in Logistics and Transport Sri Lanka. She has been a strong advocate of women empowerment and has received many awards and accolades for her career achievements, and also serves as the director of Logicare Private Limited. Mr. Charita Subasinghe is the president of the retail sector of John Keells Holdings PLC and has been with the group since 2003. He is an associate member of the Chartered Institute of Management Accountants. Your session moderator is Mr. Arunama Vilmada, the Customer Development Director of Unilever Sri Lanka, one of the world's leading consumer goods companies. Mr. Marvil Mada has worked in many capacities within the organization locally. He has 8 years of rich experience working outside Sri Lanka, managing North Africa, the Middle East, and the Central African regions, covering more than 30 markets. He also serves as a board member of UN Global Compact Sri Lanka. Mr. Arunama Vilmada, over to you to kick us off.
Thank you, Janani. I hope you can hear me. And welcome to all on the call. This is the last session on the the two-day webinar organized by the UNGC, on making global goals local business. Well, it's very hard to craft an agenda, for a panel discussion these days, without talking about supply chain challenges, that we have faced during the pandemic. And we know that, pandemic completely changed us and our ways of working and, pushed us from the comfort zones to take bold decisions, which we would have never taken. Yeah. And of course, we did well, and industries became resilient in the past 2 years. But, there will be more challenges, with signs of pandemic easing off. And I think it's important to know and predict what will be the future of supply chain and how should we shape our businesses, this extreme VUCA world. We also know that how sustainable supply chain practices can contribute to the sustainable, development goals, through initiatives like improving on environmental, social, economic factors, throughout the supply chain. And there are many examples, of industries and companies implementing and adhering to good practices in this space. And we also know that through these initiatives, companies, industries can always conserve resources, optimize processes. Then you can uncover innovations, to save costs and increase productivity, and I think more importantly to promote corporate values in their own organizations. So we will discuss more on these lines, and in the next hour we will be discussing on the topic building supply chain resilience. And our eminent panel are going to cover some territory on how supply chain will be impacted and disrupted with the global challenges in the future, and touch upon some business processes and strategies that could help organizations to make supply chain resilient and sustainable over a long period of time. And without much ado, I think we should start our speakers to enrich ourselves, and I would like to invite Mr. Ikram Katlan, the Managing Director, Aitken Spence Shipping Limited, to kick off the session. And as all of us know, logistics industry is an integral part of the supply chain, which keeps the world dynamic. And the industry has shown its resilience, over the years, amidst many challenges, and it has evolved immensely, over the years to become refined and efficient and cost effective. And I will leave it to Ikram to talk about how the industry will progress, and for him to talk us on global perspective, especially on the role of decarbonization and digitization to create a resilient supply chain. So over to Ikram.
Ladies and gentlemen, my topic today is basically the global perspective on the role of decarbonization and digitalization in the logistics industry to create a resilient supply chain. To a shipping man who has experienced a transformation of the logistics industry to what it is today, it has been an enlightening and educative journey. My references today will be more weighted to the maritime industry, which I am more familiar with. Let me first focus on the role of digitalization has played in the logistics industry. The logistics industry, which forms a fundamental and an integral part of the supply chain industry, is what keeps the world dynamic. Be it moving raw material from a mine several kilometers below the earth, to a processing plant halfway across the world, to a production facility which requires the processed goods for manufacturing a final product, which is then again shipped to markets around the world. The supply chain industry has shown resilience over the years amidst world wars, pandemics, embargoes, and natural catastrophes, and has kept ticking despite the challenges and disruptions. It has evolved over the years and has become refined, efficient, and cost-effective. One of the key factors is making the industry efficient, cost-effective, is the digitalization processes of and activities. Customers can look at transportation options, obtain quotes, book space, provide instructions, process documentation, track and trace shipments, arrange payments, and arrange clearances, etc. online. This has assisted the customers greatly in that they are able to plan, execute, track, trace, monitor, ship, or receive goods on a timely manner. The concept of just-in-time was an outcome of this digitalization, where a customer could ship or receive goods just in time he or she requires same. This concept, which was introduced by the Japanese, brought in a new dimension in the supply chain matrix. Companies sourcing goods wanted it delivered to them just in time so that they would not require storage facilities, not need to hold inventory, avoid blocking capital, and make the supply chain more efficient and cost-effective. Suppliers had to work backwards so that the deadlines set by the receivers could be met. The transportation and the logistics industry too embraced this concept and adjusted themselves to provide solutions to meet the customer's requirements. Shipping lines started offering services which were able to keep up with the delivery times of the customers. Weekly services became daily services or twice daily services. Direct calls with fast transit times, guaranteed day of the week departure and arrival, etc. Airlines too chipped in to meet the customer requirements. Logistic companies also stepped up their efforts to provide end-to-end, just-in-time deliveries, which worked seamlessly. But come the COVID pandemic, the whole supply chain industry was in turmoil. This disruption has severely shaken the supply chain industry. The lockdowns, restrictions, health and safety protocols, people affected by the pandemic, the just-in-time concept was no longer effective. Suppliers don't know when they could load out the cargo because of the severe space crunch and equipment shortage. Even if they were able to get the equipment and load the cargo on a vessel, they were unsure of the date and time of arrival of cargo at destination. This issue was further exacerbated as the freight cost escalated by 4 and 5 folds. This is not only affecting the sea transportation, but also the air and land transportation. This disruption, which started in the mid-2020s, still continues, and there doesn't seem to be an end in sight. This has severely affected the supply chain industry and resulted in manufacturers not receiving their raw materials on time, thereby affecting production and delivery. Affected exporters who have not been able to ship out goods to meet deadlines set by importers, and also importers who have been unable to receive goods to meet orders and commitments. The importers who were sourcing goods from 1 or 2 points suddenly started looking for alternate locations to source goods. Contrary to the much practiced just-in-time concept, manufacturers had to stock up as lead times were not known factors. The logistics industry had to look for new ways to keep the supply chain running, because a total breakdown would cause havoc and bring all industries to a grinding halt. Digitalization has become the bedrock for supply chain resilience. The role of digitalization is to make business easier, effective, and efficient. Most countries have set up a national single window linking up all stakeholders and users onto one platform so that transactions can be executed digitally. Unfortunately, Sri Lanka has still not set up a national single window system or a port community system. If we are to leverage on our strategic location and provide a unique proposition as a logistics and supply chain hub, a national single window system is an imperative. We must adopt digitalization in all spheres, as it is a critical factor for our aspirations to become a logistics and supply chain hub. Now, moving into the role of decarbonization, the industry also has laid great emphasis on reducing the carbon footprint. If I'm to speak on the maritime industry, the International Maritime Organization brought in new regulations to ensure that a cap on the sulfur content in the marine fuel oil supplied to ships with effect from 1st Jan 2020. In spite of the immediate cost escalations, the maritime industry adapted this in order to reduce emissions from vessels and support sustainable development goals. Certain ports too introduced regulations on the type of fuel ships could use within the territorial waters or within port limits. Investment into scrubbers, electronic RTGs, shore power are some of the significant changes towards sustainability. The shipping sector is crucial for international trade, as 80 to 90% of the global trade occurs through shipping, and hence vital to the world economy. Due to the scale of the sector, shipping represents 3% of the total global greenhouse gas emissions. Therefore, strict environment regulations around emissions are set to cause major technological changes in the industry. The demand for shipping is likely to grow over the next 3 decades. Market surveys conducted in order to understand the current market trends show that the market and industry are considering decarbonization as a part of their business strategy over the coming decades. In line with the IMO's ambition to reduce CO2 emissions from shipping by at least 50% by 2050 compared to the 2008 baseline. Deep decarbonization will require financial incentives and policies both at international and regional levels. To conclude, we strongly believe that managing risks and opportunities in the supply chain is critical for sustenance and long-term value creation. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Ikram. Our next speaker will be Gani Dialwis, Global Chapters in Vilat. As you know, the concept of supply chain transparency was virtually unknown 15 years ago, and yet today it commands the attention of many companies and industries across board. And the reason for this increased interest are very clear. Companies are under pressure from governments, consumers, and other stakeholders to divulge more information about their supply chains. And the reputational cost of failing to meet these demands can be very high. And one more very interesting and a very important reason for this process to become increasingly important, is that more consumers are demanding. And in research it shows that consumers are willing to even pay 2% to 10% more for a product that provide greater supply chain transparency. So to talk more about improving supply chain disclosure and transparency through digitization and partnerships, over to Gaini.
Thank you, Aruna. So let me share a few slides, because today, this being the last session, I thought I'll share some slides so that you will not get bored a bit, right? Okay, so as Aruna mentioned, my scope of my involvement here at the webinar is to talk about how supply chain disclosure and transparency can be done through supply chain collaboration as well as digitalization. So let me first thank you very much. Thank you very much, UN Global Compact Sri Lanka, for inviting me for this webinar, which is Making Global Goals Local Business, for a very topical theme, which is very close and dear to my heart. And when you're talking about building supply chain resilience, I mean, up until very recently, supply chain was never heard of. Now it has become everybody's in their vocabulary. And so much so that even US President Joe Biden is now talking about how to, debottleneck the port situation in the US so that they can get the goods for Christmas. So it has become such an important area, because it is logistics and supply chain that has made this COVID pandemic travel around the world and became a pandemic. So it is up to us in supply chain, traditionally who we were talking about very long, lengthy supply chains, raw materials are moving back and forth. And we didn't have much transparency and visibility on the supply chain. And we were talking about a very volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous environment that we have to face in supply chain. But now it is upon us now, and it is already with us, and we are now trying to get out. So thankfully to Ikram, talking about how the shipping industry is getting ready for this. So I will specifically talk about how the consumer minds are shifting in this new normal that is panning out, and also what are they really asking for and looking for, and what are the tools and techniques that we can use in order for us to give that visibility while ensuring supply chains are moving smoothly. So that's what I'm going to talk about. So to do that, I will first talk about how the consumer behaviors changed in the past 1.5 years. I mean, some of these emerging trends were anyway happening, but I think it expedited, right? Now, all of the consumers, now all of us, you and me, we all know now, we are very conscious about our shopping. We are very mindful. We are cutting down on non-discretionary expenses. So we are only buying essentials. We are trying to do things homemade. I mean, trying to grow things in our own gardens, because we have some health and hygiene consciousness coming in now. And with that, because we are all homebound, there is a huge rise in digitalization. I mean, digital and omni-channel evolution happens. And I know Sri Lanka's e-commerce market is less than 1%. It's at a very abysmally low level, but COVID actually brought about a resurgence in the e-commerce market. And I'm sure Charita will talk about in detail about it. So there was a huge growth in online customer base, and consumers were more and more concerned about the health and hygiene, therefore contactless services, rising local networks, and a lot of the SMEs came into the fold, and they actually quickly pivoted into the new normal than the big organizations. And therefore, availability was a huge challenge for big companies because they had a huge portfolio. And therefore, because of the non-availability of the product, there was a shift in the brand loyalty, and people were more conscious about the value, quality, and other sustainability and all of those aspects. And as I mentioned, again, everybody was mindful. Health and well-being was at the top of their mind. And also, contactless services and rise in local demand was something that everybody was looking for. So when you have a huge change in the consumer behavior, supply chain has to be fully driven to meet the consumer needs. Because supply chains, gone are the days that the manufacturers used to call shots and say, this is what we have, you take it or leave it. Situation has totally reversed now. You won't exist in the market if you're not consumer focused. So you need to understand the needs and wants of the consumer. What is the value proposition? What is it that you really are trying to deliver to meet the consumer needs? So to do that, as organizations, we have to have an idea. I'm sure Charita will be happy, and the two of the companies who are part of UNGC Sri Lanka, I have used those pictures there, right? So do we really have an understanding about our supply chain? Do we know from the point of origin to the point of consumption, all the stages of the entire supply chain? Do you have visibility? Do we know our supply chain? I think most of the organizations, barring some of the old organizations and multinationals, most of the organizations got the shock of their lives during the pandemic because they didn't know what they should have known about the supply chain. So that was a huge shock to everybody. So it is important for us to understand, go beyond our tier 1 supplier, the immediate suppliers. Do we know the entire supply chain network? Yes, it takes a long time to map the whole thing. Once you understand the entire supply chain network, you can easily identify the weak linkages in the supply chain. Once you understand those, then you can easily find backup sources, strengthen those weak linkages so that you will be able to smoothly flow the supply chain, because moving back and forth information, movement of goods and services is what we do in supply chain. So it is important for us to get this visibility and transparency. That is exactly what we are planning to do. But it is important to understand, how do we get this visibility? Most organizations, even internally in their own organizations, don't have this understanding because they all are working in their own little silos, and information doesn't exist sometimes. And companies don't like to share information because they think it actually impacts their competitive advantage. For one reason. The other reasons may be that they don't have all the information upstream and downstream available. And even the information that are already available is not accurate. And there is no ROI on the investment on getting this visibility on the supply chain. So those are challenges that we need to really look at. So do we really know our supply sourcing? Where is it coming from? Whether it is ethically produced. If you're a beverage manufacturing company, do you know who your suppliers are? If you're using fruits and vegetables for making juices, do you know what kind of pesticides are being used? Do you have that visibility and traceability? All that you need to develop that if you want to really understand and give that information disclosure to your customers. Then what about the processing part of it? Do you know where it is being processed? Do we know what kind of chemicals are being used in the process? Do you have whether there is an alternative sourcing options available if there's a disruption? Have you done your business continuity planning, mapped the whole supply chain risk assessment, and then identified alternative sources? Do we know our packaging? What percentage of the packaging that we have in the organization is being recycled? Are we using that recycle component in that? Because I know in the garment industry, I'm sure Afam will talk about it, some of the yarn that they use, use a PET bottle recycled and all that. So there are things that are being used by some of the organization, even locally, not only globally. So we need to look at various chemicals in the packaging. Do we know that? Do we have visibility? How do we distribute? Do we know what kind of mode of transport, like Ikram mentioned, do we have visibility to track and trace where the shipments are? When the Suez Canal got blocked due to ever given ship. Now, some of the companies who had visibility on their movements, they were able to reroute some of the shipments. That is, they were actually well ahead of the others because they had the visibility. Do we know who our consumers are? What kind of product? Are they happy with it? What kind of feedback you can get it? And not only that, beyond the consumers, how do they dispose? Are they doing it? Do we have the facility? I know Kiehl's and all, they have their own collection mechanism for some of the PET bottles and all that. So there are companies in our country who go beyond the call of the duty and to manage these entire end-to-end supply chain requirements. And also finally, our supply chains have been structured in a more linear manner. They are very long. And our attitude is you take stuff, make stuff and throw stuff attitude. We don't look at cradle to cradle approach. Our output or the byproducts that come out of our system, do we really make an effort to make that as an input to another industry? Do we have that connection? And I'm sorry, in Sri Lanka, we don't have that kind of circular supply chains evolving. Yes, there are a few organizations that are working on it. So disclosure means, can you give that kind of traceability, information regarding your supply chain, about all that to the customers, so that they can make informed decisions about what they buy, because it all goes well with your company's purpose. So what you really mean by resilience of a supply chain? If you give visibility to your supply chain, resilience means your ability to resist any disruptive situation like the black swan situation that we are in, which is highly low probability and highly impacting the whole global economy, right? What are the measures you can take to resist this disruption? When you say resistance, do you proactively take actions or mitigatory measures to avoid these disruption and the impact? I mean, you may not be able to 100% avoid. How can you contain? What are the measures you have taken, to mitigate that risk spreading to the rest of the organization and bringing the whole supply chain to a grinding halt? You must also look at the recovery process. That's what we are in now in the pandemic. Slowly the countries are opening up. So when you are recovering, you see a huge spike in the demand. And how do we really manage the backlog? How do we stabilize the entire supply chain? How do you return back to normalcy? The time taken for you to recover and come back on track from the beginning of the disruption till you come out of it has to be tracked and understood. You need to use tools and techniques. You need to have visibility to identify where the weak linkages are. Then only you can go and attack, because you can activate your business continuity plan. You can move into a plan B if there are any, or a plan C. So this is something that you need to really work on. So this is something that you need to really look at in the transparency maturity continuum, where organizations that are really evolved are the organizations like Patagonia, where you give the full spectrum of disclosure about what you do with all the stakeholders that you have, with not only within the organization, direct suppliers, indirect suppliers, up to the raw materials. As the UK, for instance, the Walmart wing of the UK, and they actually selectively have in their television cameras in the stores, selectively give visibility for some of their supply locations, information, the manufacturers who are supplying to their location. So they are so confident about the processes that they have put in place with the suppliers as to that they are willing to openly showing about it. And your entire footprint in their supply chain, how do you give visibility? And we ourselves, we have in Sri Lanka, EcoSpindle, the company who picks ocean plastics, and then they are, they have visibility in the areas from where they are picking it up, and then they are using it, spinning the yarn and then using it in the t-shirt, and you can say from where, which area that you got it from, and they are having an app to do that. So, I mean, they are not able to directly pinpoint. So how do you really look at starting with a code of conduct? You agree with your partners in the supply chain, okay, to comply with certain requirements, or you slowly go into certifications to, see, okay, once you comply with the certification, various standards are there in Forest Alliances, various standards that you have, ISO 14000, various product standards, service standards, the process standards that you have. You look at compliance to that so that you know that they are transparent in the way that they do things. Or you have performance-based matrices, and you have traceability to the origin, and full disclosure is the best thing. So if you want to be an innovator in the sustainability front, you need to be bold enough to be transparent. Yes, you might think that you will have a competitive advantage, but then you must fight out in the market. You should collaborate, because you cannot, no company can work in the sustainability space by working alone, because we are part of a bigger ecosystem. So you need to work together. You need to have visibility to manage that, because there will come a day, although we don't go into that level in Sri Lanka, that the consumer might ask, and we will be forced to put it on the pack, on the label, a QR code or something to say, okay, what's the distance that it has traveled? What is the carbon footprint of this product? It will come to that. And that's what the consumers are asking for in time to come. So let's be ready for that.
And next, I would like to invite Afam Ali, the Group Supply Chain Director, Brandix Lanka Limited. Yeah. And as we all know, the apparel industry went through many challenges during the past 2 years during the pandemic. And I think yet, the most of the players confronted those disruptions, with different strategies to be resilient and, continue the business as usual. Yes, and going forward, it will be very interesting for us to, understand how apparel industry is, transforming, to become more resilient. And, we have Afam just to enlighten us about that, and he will be talking to us on regional perspective on how the apparel industry supply chain is transforming to become more resilient. So over to Afam.
Thank you, Aruna. So my task here is to talk about resilience from an apparel industry in Sri Lanka's perspective. So when we talk of resilience, I think this was touched on before by Gaini as well. We say we are resilient based on how we can absorb shock, how fast we recover from that shock, and how well we come out of it. So if these are indicators of our resilience. So let's quickly take a view of what Sri Lanka's apparel exports been, which is a very important industry for our economy, both from a foreign exchange perspective as well as a livelihood perspective in terms of employment generation. So if you look at the 20-year span from 2000 onwards, we see that our exports have doubled. Now, why did I choose this period? That is because we are speaking of COVID today as a major, unprecedented or a fairly serious shock that we have received. But this is not our first rodeo as far as an industry is concerned. So let's look at some of the earlier shocks that we witnessed and see how that impacted the industry. See, this industry was covered by something called the multi-fiber agreement till end of 2004. That was in force from 74 to 2004. And it offered protectionism in the form of quotas for exports. So many predicted that countries which are small, like Sri Lanka, will be off the sourcing map once this protection is over. But as you can see, that couldn't stop us from growing. Neither could the global financial crisis in 2008 and 9 stop our growth. In fact, you can see the jump that we've had since then. And we are very confident as a nation, as also an industry, that COVID is not going to do it either. And that is shown in this graph by way of the dip that we have had in 2020. But the encouraging sign is the recovery that we are showing in 2021, and we are sure that we will keep this upward trajectory going. So we can say that there is a significant amount of resilience in the industry as far as apparel industry in Sri Lanka goes. Now let's talk about what are the factors that promote this resilience. Now this is by no means a textbook answer, neither is it an exhaustive answer in terms of these are the only factors that promote resilience. This is more an experiential answer. And I will talk about two groups of factors here. And the first group is core business strategies. And this is purely based on our experience as an industry. And under that, the first point I want to speak about is the nature of our relationship with our customers. We are proud to say that we are the suppliers to tier 1 fashion brands in the world. And with many other players in the island, the tenure of this relationship is spanning over decades. So it is by no means a fly-by-night kind of a relationship. So therefore, when COVID happened, right, the first impact we felt was a downturn in the Western markets. And we got some very difficult requests from our customers. They wanted us to hold back on production. They wanted us to hold back on inventory. They wanted cancellations. They wanted credit to be extended. Now, these are difficult choices, but with the support of our supply chain partners, we were able to be there with our customers at the time of need. Now, this came in very handy because when the Western market started recovering, guess what? We, in this part of the world, started getting the impact of COVID. And because of the strategic nature of the relationship, what happened was the same spirit of partnership was reciprocated by the customers. Otherwise, if they were to force the full brunt of cost of failure in the form of cancellations and air freights on us, many of our players would have been out of business. So this win-win kind of a strategic relationship as opposed to a transactional relationship is a major factor that promotes resilience. The second factor I want to talk about is the nature of the players itself in the industry. Now in Sri Lanka, we don't have a monopoly in terms of a single player ruling the market, neither do we have a highly fragmented base. We have a fairly healthy average size. The nature of these players is such that they are multinational in nature. We have quite big players and they are multinational. Now I will talk about Brandix, the organization that I represent. We have operations in India and in Sri Lanka in addition to several other countries. India faced the brunt of COVID before Sri Lanka. What we were able to do is to move the production to Sri Lanka and still serve the customers' requirements when India was having the impact. As India recovered, Sri Lanka went into a spin and we were able to do the opposite. And this is true to many of our competitors in the island as well, who have operations in the Far East, who have operations in Africa, and they were able to actually move things around and make sure that we are honoring our commitment to the customer to a significant extent. So this nature of the composition of the market is very important to promote resilience. The last point on hardcore strategies is about technology enablement. And here we were anyway promoting the use of 3D design, 3D sampling, and also the concepts of portals and electronic data interchanges with our customers before the pandemic. What the pandemic did was that it was an effective CTO or a CIO, and it really amplified the need for this along with the Zooms and the Teams of the world and filled the gap that otherwise would have really hit us hard. Now, these core business strategies alone cannot promote resilience as we see it. There is a softer side to it, which is we have to be proud as an industry in Sri Lanka that we had greater purpose other than just doing business. Sri Lanka owns this brand called Garments Without Guilt. In an industry that is plagued with a lot of bad reputation for being sweatshops, for child labor, for forced labor, we have thankfully been able to keep our heads above that kind of murky water, and the customers know us for a very good reputation for social responsibility. And many players in the island are doing substantial amount of work on this front, whether it is in the field of employee empowerment, especially a lot of the associates in this industry are women, so women empowerment. When we talk about education of our own associates as well as their kids, when we talk of the field of sports, when we talk of community development around water, water and sanitation, a lot of very focused CSR efforts go into keeping this whole concept of social responsibility in a relevant state. The next point is about sustainable manufacture. As we know, our island can be, it's small, but it can be very proud of having world's firsts. I don't want to list it out here because want of time, but if you look at Brandix, if you look at MS, if you look at Heller, you can see the list goes on, and I don't want to just keep mentioning names, but we have a lot of world's firsts in terms of how we are reducing our carbon footprint. Most of our facilities are world-class. They are setting records in terms of LEED certification as firsts in the world. So together, this concept of core business strategies and a greater purpose, as we see it, held us in a good state to get through this pandemic as well, and to grow to a position of strength after it. I just want to finish my session with a view of the future. We are firmly believing that what got us here necessarily will not get us from here. So we envisage some future challenges which we will have to be conscious of, and we may not be as good at these as we are in what I showed you in the earlier slides. So what we are talking about here is the focus on innovation. Now, our part of the world, yes, we do a little bit of this and a little bit of that, but if you look at, I think we have the potential to be known for innovation, but that will require a kind of a concerted effort, which we will have to work on. I think Gayani touched on this concept of transparency and collaboration, which has really come in as waves in as far as demand is concerned, because this concept of traceability now is a big ticket item, and it comes in many forms, basic document sharing to even DNA testing of raw materials is being trialed out now as we speak. The third element is how we are going to use data now, especially the apparel industry is known where, our ways of predicting demand and things like that are not, too much to write home about. So in this day and age, we can do much more, and with the kind of IT literacy we have, we can focus on data-driven insights, really fueling our operations and reducing waste. The last point I want to say is that resilience also means redundancy in terms of supply, which means the customer is expecting different country of origin strategy. They don't want us to be in one location. So we have to adopt a greater international mindset and almost come up with a kind of a operational blueprint which can be replicated effectively and efficiently elsewhere as well. So I just wanted to touch on these future challenges very quickly before I ended the session. Aruna, with that, I hand it over to you.
Thank you, Afam. We are finding it difficult to manage the time, but it's okay. And finally, we have Charita Subasinghe, President, Retail, John Keel's Holding. I had the pleasure to work along with Charita during the highly volatile market conditions. And I'm sure he will have a lot to share, especially in regards to the retail trade, on how we have sailed the pandemic period. And we are still not out of the woods, and it's important to discuss what challenges we will foresee in the future. And I think more importantly, how we should change, and what critical actions are required going forward. So let me ask Charita to talk us on building resilience in Sri Lankan context through supply chain management and development. Over to Charita.
Today, we are at a stage after about 24 months of COVID, and listening to what Gayani, Ikram, as well as Ifam mentioned, one of the biggest challenges today is the supply chain. So post the pandemic situation, this is what has hit us. And if you could just think through, up to now, when it came to supply chain, we have always been talking about efficiency in the supply chain, cost reduction in the supply chain, and that's the type of conversation we have had in terms of the supply chain part of it. But today, as we heard Gayani speaking, which I will confirm to you from a point of a consumer's behavior, is the consumer lifestyle to their expectations are changing significantly. Then from the other side, when talking to Ikram, you could understand that from a logistic point of view, the world was not ready for a situation that we face like today. And hence you see that the container cost, the shipping cost has increased 5 to 10 folds. And that has also created inflation in the world to the extent where most of the governments are not that popular world over. So that comes to a situation so that gives us a flavor of why we need a world over a resilient supply chain. And what I'm going to take you through is more to do with what we as a supermarket chain in Sri Lanka has done in that context, with the intention of giving you an understanding how resilience can be incorporated in the Sri Lankan context. So going to the next slide, post today, if you look at it, what has caused today is a concept of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity is what has come in today's world. And in that case, while previously we talked about high performance and low cost, today, now we are talking about robustness. How do we ensure uninterrupted product availability on the shelf is the type of conversation we are having today, to the extent where some of the organizations might go under if they are not able to get their supply chain act together as soon as possible. Another element that is also causing an issue is the climate changes which are happening, where you are not getting the rains at the right time and you're getting the rains at the wrong time. And in that context, how are you managing the agriculture aspect of it? And that is also having an impact on the food security as well. So if you look at the new norm today for a procurement guy, a supply chain guy, is the many disruptions that are happening, the bullwhip effect, where there are the high peaks and the troughs in the demand part, which they need to manage. Then there are also scenarios that will crop up as we go on, and you need to have solutions, possible solutions to those scenarios as well. Then there are also the new markets that are coming up, as well as the demographic changes in the demand and supply as well, and the lifestyle, as Gayani quite well mentioned. So those are the changes that are happening in the supply chain. And in that context, to build a resilient supply chain, the processes and the technologies need to be stepped up, which will allow us to have better forecasting, anticipating demand, and having responses that are appropriate for the different changes that are going to happen. For us to do that, one area is the engagement part. We need to understand what are the risks that are there and how we're going to manage the risk. And that needs trust and engagement, as mentioned by Gayani. While previously we would have thought that information had to be secured, and we were worried about the information going into competition to whatever. But I think today, the bigger, the more information sharing will enable us to become better prepared is the conversation we should be having, and that means more transparency. Then comes the strategic foresight, understanding how the market demands are changing, the demands of the consumer changing, and giving and enabling the supply chain to be ready to be delivering according to that. Then comes the data analytics. Unfortunately, what has happened in Sri Lanka up to now is that we have not had the discipline to get the data together. I mean, a simple thing, even in the agriculture front, unfortunately, we are still talking about what we have been talking for the last many decades, where basically when the price increases on a particular item, let's say carrot, then all the farmers start producing carrot. And what happens then is there's an oversupply, and that disrupts that entire supply chain. But if data is used properly, there would be a better planning of their agriculture, the farming activities that will enable a better supply chain, robust supply chain of all the products at the right price to the to the customer. Then comes that climate control elements. In that context, how we have looked at is that I think we should not allow the climate to dictate terms. And in that context, we need to take control of those elements. And that means more technology and trying to control your how you practice your agriculture in the different areas. And that is the area that we need to work on. And those are the elements I believe that needs to get lined up, planned out in order to have a very resilient supply chain, a robust function going forward. So talking about our journey in terms of Kiel supermarkets, where we are today is that we have over 1 million customers shopping with us on a monthly basis. We have over 125 stores across the island. We have 4,000 team members working. We work with over 4,000 farmers, and we have over 650 suppliers that we work with. In terms of our products on the shelf, about 30% of that can be produced within the country. There's about 35% of what is on the shelf. There is a certain element of raw material that has to get imported. So any disruption in the world supply chain of bringing that raw material will have a disruption on that 35%. And there's another 35% that is totally imported from abroad. So you could see the impact a disruption in the supply chain could have on food security. And that is the problem at hand. The journey that we started about 2-3 years ago was that in our core purpose was to improve the quality of life of the nation. And we had set up a certain value structure in order to deliver that core promise. And with that in mind, we worked very closely with the farmer community over the last 2 years specifically. And in that context, we worked with different parties, different farmer organizations. And one area that we looked at was to improve the farmer capability. And secondly, was to develop the infrastructure for the customer, for the farmer to take control of what they're producing and not really relying purely on the environmental conditions that were impacting. The outcomes of that work meant that we have been able to, out of the 460 farmers, we have been able to improve the quality of life of about 335 farmers. That included improving their yield, improving or reducing their produce loss by going into drip irrigation, insect-proof net, polymulching, as well as this is also another element called GAP, There is a good agriculture practices that we have also been able to work with the farmers on, where through that, they have been able to produce at a lesser amount of input. When I say input, that means pesticides as well as fertilizer, and thereby improving the productivity as well as improving the profitability of what they're producing. Then we have been also been able to improve the technical know-how of these agri farmers, as well as improving the sustainability of that as well. This, I'm not trying to create what we have done, but what I want to get for you to get a feel is that what could be done in Sri Lanka to improve the resilience of the supply chain. Another element is the greenhouses that have got done with these farmers, and that meant that they are able to manage the disruptions that could happen due to the environmental changes.
Charita,
And
can we conclude?
Yes. So in summary, it can be done, Aruna, in Sri Lanka in terms of robustness by engaging with the different farmer communities, as well as forecasting tools. Data analytics can be worked on. We have been working on, and I can share with you as we go on, the type of results that we have also got with that. And that is what I would think could be done in Sri Lanka to improve the resilience part of it, Aruna.
Thank you. Thank you, Charita. I think we are running out of time. Maybe we can take one question, and I would take one question from the platform, which I will take, which is, what role can the circular economy play in building supply chain resilience? And is there an opportunity for Sri Lanka as a nation to lead this transformation in South Asian region? Anybody can take this question. I think Afam, you can take this question.
Yes, Aruna. So Aruna, I mean, this concept, since we are running out of time also, I will quickly talk about the concept as we know it. It's very often misunderstood with this concept of, just sustainability or recycling. It's much more than that. Now those who are interested in the topic should check out Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which is a fantastic source for this concept of circularity. But unfortunately, Aruna, what we see is that it has to be a systemic solution, which means that the entire supply chain has to come together in order to actually make this work. Now, if you look at an apparel perspective, this is a real need, because what we are saying, the research has shown that the average consumer is purchasing 60% more than what they did 15 years ago, and they only wear them for half as long. Now, if this is not fundamentally changed, then we are playing lip service to this concept of circularity. 85% of the clothing that Americans purchase apparently goes to landfills, right? That translates to almost 80 pounds per person per year, and so on. But now, in terms of some strategies that are in play, we are talking about dealing with sustainable fiber itself, because if you look at the current, conventional fiber, removing it, separating it is a very, very difficult exercise. Then material sciences to create fabrics in more eco-friendly ways is another angle. There is a very interesting concept of clothing rental as opposed to clothing purchase. But what I'm trying to say is, in the Sri Lankan context, we will have to actually, probably one of the ideas we can float is that from an R&D perspective, whether the players can come together, pool resources, and really invest in following this up, as opposed to trying to do it on our own.
We have to come to a hard close because it's almost 5 o'clock. Thank you, and that sums up the session on building supply chain resilience. And I would like to thank the panel once again, and for all the people on the call. And thanks so much, and all the very best, and stay safe. Thank you so much.
Thank you.